Hello students, welcome to MOOC Political Economy 2. The topic for our discussion today is Neo-Imperialism Basic Insights. Let us begin by exploring the concept of imperialism. Imperialism is basically connotative of a relationship of domination and subjugation. It is domination exercised by a more advanced country over one which is less advanced. Imperialism can be viewed as the generic concept or the mother concept, and we can come across different shades or kinds of varieties of imperialism. The earlier variety that you are already aware of is what is called colonialism. Okay? It is difficult to understand what is new about neocolonialism unless we clarify at the very outset the subtle difference that exists between the two concepts. Colonialism or old-style imperialism involved the direct political domination of a less advanced country by a more advanced country. This used to happen for various reasons. Could be because it wanted to, the advanced country wanted to accommodate a rising population. Could be because it was spurred by a sense of racial arrogance or national aggressiveness. Could be because it tried to convert that area into a market for its finished products and also as an agricultural appendage where raw materials could be grown to feed its industries at home. It could be because of ideological reason. So various reasons motivated the earlier metropolitan centers to clamp down political rule in different parts of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and that is what you come across as colonialism. But you see, in case of neocolonialism, the kind of domination persists, but the style of domination undergoes a transformation. Here, the country which is dominated is formally independent, so the political control that is exerted is not blunt or blatant as in the case of colonialism, but it does happen. Just because it is not obvious doesn't mean it is non-existent. And that is what you have to keep in mind when you try to understand neocolonialism. The concept of neocolonialism tells us that the domination continues on part of the more advanced country over the less advanced country, but this domination is channelized in extremely skillful, surreptitious ways, so that although formally the country remains dominated, it is not obvious. And this is what we call neocolonialism. The newness consists in the lack of direct political control. The newness consists in the disguise which the domination wears. So the essence of imperialism remains true in case of both colonialism as well as in case of neocolonialism, as both represent styles of domination that are exercised by more advanced countries over less advanced countries for various reasons ranging from the economic to the ideological to the political to the demographic. But to understand the emergence of neocolonialism, I must begin by drawing your attention to some important developments in the world that stared us in the face in the aftermath of the Second World War. What are these developments that I would like to draw your attention to? First, you have what is known as de-Europeanization of world politics. You see, politics, world politics prior to the World War was predominantly European in the sense that the big powers of Europe were like the bandmasters who set the tune of the entire orchestra that was being played throughout the world. But the Second World War cut them to size. It was not possible for them to maintain colonies anymore because the task of domestic reconstruction stared them in the face, and they all gave independence to their colonies and retreated back into their shells, and this is what we call de-Europeanization of world politics. The second development is the various black spots that became discernible on the world map as a result of the retreat of colonialism. I am basically referring to the birth of the Third World, all those countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America which were emancipated from colonial rule because of the de-Europeanization of world politics. Third, an interesting development is the birth of the People's Republic of China. Why is this interesting? You see, although socialism had happened a long time ago when Soviet Union was born in 1917, but you must understand that although the whole idea of socialism was something which people throughout the third world tried to understand and view with almost moon dust in their eyes, they were never really considering the possibilities of engineering socialism in their own countries because it was looked upon more as a miracle, some kind of a historical freak. But after the birth of China, the prospects of ushering in socialism in the third world countries seemed much more optimistic. And that is why the People's Republic of China created a significant impact throughout the world, because it whetted the appetite of people, depressed people all over the third world, to try and usher in, or at least contemplate ushering in socialism in their own countries. And finally, the last important development I would like to harp on is the emergence of the USA as a superpower. Now, USA, you will remember, was at one time a colony of Great Britain. So it was looked upon favorably by depressed people throughout the third world who thought of USA as some kind of a kind uncle to whom they could look up to for aid and assistance. And strangely, USA was also the country which the West European powers, the war-devastated economies of Europe looked up to for all kinds of aid and assistance. So USA indulged in what is known as dollar diplomacy. Through aid that it tried to dish out to Europe and to the larger world in the form of Marshall Aid. You've seen the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine. So equipped with all these instruments, USA which had so long been following a policy of isolationism. You remember Europe had been left to stew in its own juice because America was following this isolationist policy, but it did not want to carry on that way for long. It wanted to embark on a global role, and that is why the emergence of the USA was significant, because it reached out to different countries seeking aid and assistance from the USA, and through the aid that it offered, it also created the avenues to get involved not only in West European politics but in world politics at large. It will be interesting to take a look at the specific factors which sponsored the rise of neocolonialism as a global phenomenon. Although this is a story which is unfolding at the same time, I will still try to explain to you at different levels for purpose of academic clarity. First, let us consider the economic level. The third world countries had inherited from their colonial past an economy which was in shambles. And if there was any resource in which they were abundant, it was manpower. But the third world was conspicuous by the absence of any kind of technological development. So that is why, because all these third world countries wanted to advance materially and technologically, they had no choice but to look up to the Western imperialist powers, their erstwhile colonial masters, for help and assistance. The Western imperialist powers took this opportunity and they offered to extend the help, but not gratis. They said that, of course, we will extend the help that you need, but in return, you will have to give us your markets. So there was some kind of a trade-off that took place between the erstwhile colonial masters and the third world countries. And that is how, at the economic level, you find how the opportunity gets created so that the third world countries once again are able to be converted into happy hunting grounds by the Western imperialist powers. There is also an ideological reason. I've already told you that the third world countries were victims of years of colonial exploitation, which is why there was hunger and poverty and hankering and misery all around. Now, all these third world countries were extremely inclined to embrace socialism, because socialism, ever since the birth of the People's Republic of China, had emerged as some kind of a panacea for all the social ills which the third world countries suffered from. And because of this inclination on part of the third world countries towards socialism, the Western imperialist powers realized that they would have to deal with the spread of socialism carefully. And because if socialism spreads, that would only restrict the domain of capitalism, which the Western imperialist world embodied. This problem was handled quite skillfully by the Western imperialist powers by promoting a policy of investment. You will find that all these countries of the world, which are looked upon as the shopper's paradise today, the Middle East countries and the Southeast Asian countries, I'm not naming specific countries, but generally you will find that these are looked upon as havens, as the shopper's paradise. And what happened at this juncture is that all these Western imperialist powers, by promoting a policy of consumerism, they flooded the economies of these countries, Middle Eastern countries, Southeast Asian countries, all the different deprived places in the third world. They were flooded with all kinds of consumer goods. So for everything from automobiles to fast food to cars to cosmetics and electronics, and it was like dangling Coca-Cola cans, chilled Coca-Cola cans before a thirsty man. And that is how, by promoting a policy of cheap consumerism, the people were dissuaded from any kind of socialist leaning because they all felt gullible. They were all swept off their feet by the rising tide of consumerism that was promoted quite skillfully by the Western imperialist powers. And the last important factor which I would like to draw your attention to is the political factor. Given the Indian experience, you will realize that the socio-economic elite, represented, for instance, by none other than Pandit Nehru, they all belonged to a class in India which was affluent, which could afford education abroad. And although they did participate subsequently in the freedom movement, there was an inbuilt softness that was already created in them towards West and Western values. So although these members of the socio-economic elite had participated in the freedom movement extensively, when they subsequently emerged as policymakers of the independent country, they automatically set such targets before them, like development, like industrialization, like urbanization, like modernization, all of which would inevitably require them to seek the help of the West. And that is how we come to the first factor, that is the economic factor. So this is how you can understand the story of the emergence of neocolonialism. So emergence of neocolonialism happened because of certain developments, including the emergence of the Third World, the emergence of socialism, and the national liberation movements in the colonial world, which compelled the imperialists to retreat. Now, the important question is, we know that imperialism has undergone some kind of a metamorphosis. Colonialism has given way to neocolonialism, which is domination, although it is disguised. Okay? The country formally remains independent and sovereign, but it continues to be manipulated through extremely surreptitious and clandestine techniques skillfully devised by the Western imperialist powers. We will now take a look as to how this domination survives and operates in the Third World in a disguised form. And again, I will try to draw your attention to different levels of neocolonial domination. The first is what we will call the economic level. Here, I will draw attention mainly to the multinational corporations and to Western aid, which are the major instruments of neocolonial domination at the economic level. Although multinational corporations have existed earlier, in the past, companies that did business in several countries were headquartered in one state. But now you will find that the whole process of production is dispersed. A particular company finds it so convenient to set up a production unit wherever it wants to capture a market. And not only that, there are several such companies, and these multinational companies have crafted out for themselves an empire over which the sun is not likely to set, and they have annual turnovers which run into billions and billions of dollars, which is sometimes easily more than the GNP of many a third world country. And by virtue of their tremendous financial clout, they are able to operate extensively throughout the Third World, so much so that if the Third World is not subservient to the operations of the multinational corporations, and the multinational corporations also threaten to leave, could be dire for the third world countries because of the fear of extreme economic backlashes and consequences. Multinational corporations serve as important instruments of neocolonial domination, not only at the economic level, that is sought to be perpetuated by control at the political level, where multinational corporations encroach upon the policy-making space of the third world countries. This is true with respect to domestic policy making because the multinational corporations act as spokespersons on behalf of their parent countries, and the parent countries back the multinational corporations with various kinds of legislations in their own countries so that they can operate extensively and unhindered throughout the third world. And not only are the multinational corporations backed by their parent countries, what you will also find is that they siphon off huge amounts of aid to political parties in the third world through different chambers of commerce and pressure groups. And when these parties come to power after winning elections, thanks to the donors, that is the multinational corporations, obviously they have to play second fiddle to the tune of the multinational corporations and the Western imperialist powers at large. But it is not only with regard to domestic policy, it is also with regard to foreign policy that you can find multinational corporations operating extensively. Multinational corporations also perform the function of intelligence gathering because every part of the third world has to be at their fingertips, so that if there is any move or tendency in any part of the third world to shift towards any kind of radicalism or socialism, that can be nipped in the bud. And that is why multinational corporations have started serving as important instruments of intelligence gathering. They encroach upon the policy-making space, both domestic and foreign, and that is how they have become instruments of neocolonial domination in contemporary times. But along with multinational corporations, I would also like to flag the notion of Western aid. Western aid, although dished out apparently for philanthropic reasons, is actually a loan which the third world country has to repay with interest. And that is why let us not overemphasize the concept of aid, because in any case it is never aid without strings. The third world country has to fulfill several important conditions in order to receive aid in the first place, like devaluing its currency or opening its doors to multinational corporations, or ensuring that there is no shift in policy towards any kind of radicalism in the domestic scenario. Now, what I would also like to emphasize is that this loan has to be repaid by the third world country, and when the time comes for repayment, soon the country realizes that its coffers are empty, so it has to borrow again in order to repay aid. And this is what is known as the debt trap. The consequences of such aid is dire because it leads to displacement of priorities on a large scale. You see, the third world country often you will find is suffering from various types of squalor, disease, malnutrition, illiteracy, inadequate standards of living. So because of these huge problems of squalor which the third world countries suffer from, they cannot afford to actually embrace any distortion of priorities, but that is what happens. So they become consumer crazy, increasingly they become gullible to Western goods, and because whatever money has been borrowed by the country in the form of Western aid is not really channelized towards any kind of self-development or building up of self-reliance. And that is why the debt trap proves to be quite a deadly noose for the third world country. But the interesting question is, how is economic domination of neocolonialism perpetuated at the ideological cultural levels? You have understood by now that the basic ploy of Western imperialism is to ensure that consumerism breeds throughout the third world. because the more there is inclination towards consumerism, greater will be the sale of goods that are dished out by the Western imperialists through their multinational corporations. And that is why it is the market which is the most alluring part of the third world so far as Western imperialism is concerned. To keep and what is the market at the end of the day? The market basically means converting more and more people and making them consumer crazy, converting them towards all kinds of consumerism. And that is why you will find that the media plays an extremely important role. I would like to draw attention to the role of advertisements when it comes to ideological cultural domination. Through colorful display of goods, the consciousness of the people in the third world is molded and made consumer crazy. And this is reinforced, you will see, at the level of mass media, where again you will find that the people lap up anything and everything that is dished out by the Western media. So often there is large-scale propaganda to which the people in the third world fall victims, and the same reality is echoed through publications. Now, as a result of this skillful use of media, the population in the third world is becoming increasingly consumer crazy. Look around and you will see all these shopping malls and extravaganza unfolding all around us and converting the people into a typical town rubble of the West. But when these economic gains don't seem to flow easily, there is a threat which is encountered by the Western imperialist powers. They do not hesitate to resort to politico-military methods of neocolonial domination as well. These methods include the establishment of various kinds of military blocs, bases, and alliances. And you will find that think of any such conglomeration of bases, alliances, you will find that they are basically trying to ensure that the domain of socialism ceases to spread and this domain is safeguarded for unrestricted activity of the Western imperialist countries. There are also various kinds of interference that are engineered, both covert and overt, in the countries throughout the third world, because the third world, more it is politically unstable, greater will be the economic inadequacy, and that will also contribute to greater and greater dependence on the West. And finally, I would like to draw your attention to the phenomenon of the arms race. A sizable portion of the profits of Western imperialist powers come from sale of arms, and that can happen only if the third world countries are hunting grounds of strife and conflict, and that is why that is often promoted by the Western imperialist powers, so that these countries are so enmeshed in their infighting that they have no choice but to keep procuring arms. This also contributes to the profits, because you see the aid that is received by the West, but the aid that is dished out by the Western imperialist powers is used ironically by the third world to buy arms from them. So it is like a double-edged sword which cuts the third world countries in every possible way. They borrow in order to repay again and again. They use that money to pay for more and more arms which they buy from the Western powers, and in the process they have to keep compromising with developmental activities at home. So that is why the poverty never seems to erode. So you can easily understand that neocolonialism, understood as a new kind of imperialism, echoes the same reality that we have seen in the essence of imperialism, which is basically a kind of domination. Imperialism, therefore, you can see, is basically connotative of a relationship of domination and subjugation. This, you have already seen, took the form of colonialism in earlier times when the domination was blunt and blatant. In case of neocolonialism, it is disguised. But although disguised, there is no reason to suspect that it is non-existent. The domination continues through various subtle and surreptitious techniques that are engineered by the imperialist powers at various levels, at the economic level, through multinational corporations and Western aid, at the ideological cultural level through advertisements, publications and mass media, and at the politico-military level through the establishment of military bloc spaces and alliances, through various forms of interference, covert and overt, and finally by entangling the arms race and drawing the people in the countries of the third world into the arms race. All these different dimensions tell us about the grim reality of neocolonialism, which is how imperialism continues to survive in an age where there are no colonies. Thank you.